Welcome, Slayers of Giants, to Tilting at Windmills, another episode where it's just me and Doug, the producer, of course. So this week, I want to talk about something that is controversial. Now, you're saying to yourself, this is the guy who publishes the Antifa Lit Journal. Like, of course it's going to be controversial. But this is not going to be about the Trump regime or the rise of fascism globally. Those are things I talk about all the time. Instead, this is going to be about something that I talk about occasionally with students. And it is something that is a great concern for those of us in the publishing industry. And I want to, first of all, kind of interrupt some of those concerns that are going to make you kind of turn this off. If I am the one saying, hey, watch out, AI is not good for you, I think the first impulse a lot of folks are going to have is to say, well, this is somebody who is old, right? Old people just don't understand this is the new technology. And I get where that is coming from. 20 years ago, there were people saying, don't use your VCR. That wouldn't have been 20 years ago. 40 years ago, don't get a VCR. It's going to kill movie theaters. And those of us who've been around long enough know that sometimes these concerns about technologies destroying other systems, other institutions, don't come to pass. So it is totally reasonable for people to be saying, hey, all these concerns about AI destroying writing are overblown. And I get where that's coming from, and to some extent, I think that they're right. And I'll talk about why. But I think the other angle that people are going to have is just, this guy is old, period. Look at this guy with this gray beard. He doesn't understand this is the new way to do things. And I get where that is coming from, right? If I had been in a college class in 1970 whatever, and I'd been using a word processor, and everybody around me is going, why can't you use a typewriter like the rest of us? Like that kind of, impulse to say this is the way that it is done now, and only somebody who is old-fashioned rejects this technology is a legitimate rebuttal, right? But I'm going to come at this from a different angle, and I want you to hear this if you are an author, and I want you to hear this if you are a student, and if you are somebody who is learning to write, and you are considering writing not necessarily as a profession. I think one of the things that is the real impediment here is people who think, I'm not going to be a writer, and so it doesn't matter so much to me that this technology is going to, be an absolute wreck in the writing field. They're saying, I'm a student, I'm getting through high school, I'm a student, I'm getting through college, pulling up ChatGPT is what the person next to me did, and the person over here, this is legitimate. And so I want to explain the problem with ChatGPT that you haven't thought of. Or maybe it is one that you have considered, and that's dangerous too, and I want you to reflect on it. So before we kind of get too far afield, I want to define our terms a little bit. So when I'm talking about AI, I'm specifically talking about large language model. That's not to say there aren't problems with a lot of this kind of technology around creating images. Those are distinct problems and will have problems in other industries. Being able to animate is going to eventually cause huge problems in the animation industry. Probably already is causing a lot of problems in the animation industry. Being able to create images that are realistic is going to cause political problems, as people are saying, I saw a video of this person doing this thing, and then somebody else is going to say that's a deep fake. And losing the ability to say this is true or false is going to cause huge problems. Those are things that all need to be dealt with. They are rational, reasonable, and need to be considered. But when I'm specifically talking about LLM AI, large language model artificial intelligence, the kind that is designed to write for you theoretically. And when we are talking about these large language model AI programs, I think it is worth reflecting on this notion that we have in some areas of our lives And you will hear this promulgated heavily from the firearms industry, where they will say the problem is not the gun, it is the person who is, holding it, right? The problem with LLMs is not the LLM AI. The problem with AI is the way it is designed to be used. It is in the code. It's what it is, the way it is set up in the first place. And that's why this is going to be a bubble. That's why it's going to pop. That's why this is ultimately not going to work. It's baked in. And here's why. If you go back to the 1950s, Alan Turing, if you don't know who Alan Turing is, have you ever seen the Apple logo? You know how it's got that little divot where somebody took a bite out of the apple? That's an homage to Alan Turing. There was a film about Alan Turing you should check out. Alan Turing was one of the fathers of modern computing and led a very tragic life despite making our lives what they are in many ways. So Alan Turing, in 1950, published a paper in which he proposed a test, a way to kind of evaluate whether or not a computer system was sentient. And he had a very clever solution because he changed the nature of the way that we would do that testing. Rather than saying, here is some kind of measurement of sentience, which is so far proven to elude human beings, he said, what if we change the nature of the way we think about sentience itself? This was very clever. Essentially, this was an epistemological solution to a metaphysical problem. Now, some of you out there are going, I don't remember those terms from my freshman philosophy class. So, to refresh your memory, metaphysics is what is really real, right? When we say, is there a God? Is there a heaven or hell? Do these things actually exist? Does the material world actually exist? Is this desk in front of me actually here, or am I the desk and everything is oneness, right? These are metaphysical questions. Epistemology is what is knowable, and how do we know what we know, and can we trust what we know? And what Turing realized is we can't know if a computer system is sentient because we can't define sentience for ourselves. If I can't know on a metaphysical level that I am thinking thoughts beyond the kind of Cartesian, I think I'm thinking thoughts, I think therefore I think, right? Even to go from there to I think therefore I am, like Descartes did, is a leap of logic. I do not know that I exist, I know that I think. Right? I think that I think. And so if I can't look at you and say, okay, based on my senses, your thought processes are real in some way, I don't know that. I have the stimulus, right? And even the stimulus is within my thoughts, right? My conception of the world exists within my brain, as far as I know, right? Even that, I don't know that I have a brain. I believe that I have a brain, and I believe that's where the thoughts are, because that's what I've been taught. But I think, therefore I think. Like, that's the extent of what I can know. So, what Turing came up with, which is very clever, is the Turing Test. If I can't know for a fact that I am sentient, and I can't define sentience distinct from an animal, I can't look at a dolphin and say, I know for a fact that a dolphin is not thinking in the same way a human does. I cannot know that, because I don't know what's going on in that dolphin's brain. Instead, we can't test that, but we can test whether or not a computer system is able to produce the same responses in other humans that a human produces in other humans. In other words, is this machine capable of fooling you into believing it's sentient? Because maybe that's the only measure we have of sentience, is the people around us sure seem like they are thinking. And so if a computer could achieve that level of, it sure seems that this computer is this real thing, is thoughtful, is responding appropriately, then I don't know if it's sentient, but it's as sentient to me as the other humans around me. So that's the Turing test. And that is what LLMs are designed to satisfy. They are designed to beat the Turing test, to make a person say, oh, this thing responds like a person. Not this thing is, real in some objective way, but this thing responds like a human being. So, since the AI system is designed to try and deceive humans into thinking it is human, it doesn't want to be extraordinary, right? It is aiming at every turn to be average, to be normal, to be believable. And that's not because the computer program can't possibly ever be designed otherwise. I don't know. I'm not a computer programmer. What I do know is that is its objective. And that's where the profit lies, right? The companies that are designing these are then marketing them to companies to say, let this program answer your phones for you. And it will sound like a human being sounds and deceive your customers into believing they're dealing with a human being. Let this computer program write your ad copy, and it will sound like something written by a human, right? It'll create the clickbait article, and the person reading it will wonder, was this written by a human? Was this written by a computer program? Bearing that in mind, that is the design. When you are sitting there in your high school English class or your college history class or whatever, and you are saying to yourself, should I just put this prompt into ChatGPT and let it respond and then turn it into my teacher? Think very carefully about the kind of student you want to present yourself as. Because if you ask ChatGPT to craft something for you, you are saying to a computer program designed to be average, can you give me something that satisfies this assignment? And so what makes me sad about the fact that people are turning to ChatGPT isn't, just that they are going to miss out on the learning, and it's not the immorality of trying to deceive their teachers, right? Those are real. If you are, using ChatGPT, you are plagiarizing. I am very upset about the theft that goes into the creation of these. That is a moral failing in and of itself, right? The people who are involved in producing these. But that doesn't have to be. That's simply because these LLMs need so much input in order to be generated that they have decided the inexpensive way is to scrub the internet. They could pay people, right, to produce these. And I think that is ultimately going to be why, artificial intelligence programs, the bubble is going to burst because the economics of the model doesn't work. I'll talk more about that in a second. But first, if you are a teacher and you are frustrated that students are choosing to use ChatGPT, recognize the reason those students are doing it is because they don't understand that ChatGPT is going to produce average writing, or worse, they believe average is better than their writing. And so I think getting that part into the conversation is really important, because otherwise we're just scolding students and university students and graduate students and adults who are using ChatGPT in a way that's ineffective, where we're saying to them, shame on you, you shouldn't use this, it's bad for writers. And they are saying to themselves, but I am not a writer. I am not qualified. I'm not good enough at this. I need this assistance. And so a far more honest, hopeful, optimistic way of dealing with the challenge of ChatGPT is explaining to people carefully, you might not feel that at this point in your writing you are better than ChatGPT, but I believe you could be better than ChatGPT because ChatGPT will always be a C. It is always going to aim for average. On purpose. It wants to deceive a human into sounding like an average human. And being exceptional would cause that software to essentially fail in its programming. It doesn't want to sound exceptional. It wants to sound average. So, when a writer out there is thinking to themselves, hey, maybe I should use ChatGPT because it will allow me to produce 10 books instead of 1 book in this next year, or 100 books, or 1,000 books that I can then send out to publishers and say, look, I wrote this thing. Please understand, not only am I going to go, no way, we're not going to publish this thing, but even if you were to indie publish and toss it out into the world, you have produced a lot more books, and maybe you think for economic reasons, hey, I don't care if they're good. I just need to, make ends meet. That's capitalism. It's awful, right? You might not think about the fact that you are hurting the industry. You might not care about the fact that you are hurting other authors. You might just be saying, I need to, make rent. But you are doing harm to yourself. Because in that act of plagiarism, when you put your name on something that you didn't actually create, you are going to be producing something where you're saying, this is my work, this is me, this is who I am merely a C. I am average, right? I am the person that is, going to be merely good enough to fool another person into believing that I am human. And I think we may be more successful in our efforts to try and explain to people that they should not be using these programs if we are saying to them, I hope for better for you. I want you to be better than merely good enough to trick another human being into believing you are a human being. I want you to be genuinely creative and unique and above average in your writing, and especially if you are, trying to become a writer. So, convincing students you need to do better than aiming for a C because I want you to get to be the kind of writer who can be better than an LLM, right? Might be more effective than just saying shame on you, and them saying, but I feel like I'm not at that level yet, because you're never going to get to that level if this is how you practice, right? Now, on the economic side, I do believe this will pass, and first I should say, if it doesn't, that's not the end of writing either. One of our authors we had as a guest on the show, and this would have been way back, episode 2 or 3, Evan Morgan Williams, who is an excellent author himself. He's got a new book coming out. I'll toss the cover up here because that has just been revealed. So do get Evan Morgan Williams' new book. But he had a great idea that at some point in the future, we were going to experience something akin to what happened with Napster and record sharing, and then eventually the transition that has that has gone on in the music industry. So for those of you who don't know, it used to be you could make a living selling albums. I know, it's crazy, I'm old, it was wild, but there was this time when there were like mega stars who could make a living and not even do that much in the way of touring. The record company would say, hey, we are putting together this band, and yes, they would do a tour, but the tour was really about promoting the album, right? The album sales were where the money was, and yes, a lot of that money did not actually go to the musicians, it went to the record companies, but they were making their money from the records. They considered themselves record companies, right? Well, that has changed thanks to Napster. So once everything went digital and everybody could steal their music, they then shifted so that the real profits now are from live shows. And so Evan Morgan Williams' idea was that maybe we will get to a place where the telling of stories is going to be done live, right? Where people will say, I'm standing up at an open mic with something handwritten, and I am sharing this, and the people who are here value this because they know it comes from a human being. I am hopeful and potentially overly optimistic and naive, that being foolishly naive is who I am, to a painful degree lately. More on that in the future. But I believe that part of the economic model for authors is going to be that people want to have a connection to the author that they are reading as a human. And so even if there's a nearly infinite supply of AI slop out there that they could choose to read, they're going to keep coming back to human authors because there's a connection they have made with that human author. And unless the AI is also producing enough to deceive this person into believing, oh yeah, the person who is behind this social media account is also AI and everything else, we have more of an obligation now as authors to show readers that there's more to us than just what's on the page, so that they're saying, I'm coming back for the next book because you are a full human and I want to read you as a full human, and keep coming back for your work. There may be some AI hit out there that's a one-off. I don't think anybody is going to be, truly making a career out of AI slop, because readers are going to want to know you as a person. Also because of the quality, it's always going to be C, right? It's going to be average. But sometimes average, won't name names, Dan Brown, but sometimes average stuff ends up being a hit, right? So that's possible. But I think people are going to want to come back knowing there's a person behind this. That being said, I do think the economic model of the entirety of LLMs is going to blow up. And the reason for that is the model was designed to say these can solve the following kinds of problems. This can be the person who answers the phone and is going to absolutely hammer that industry. This can be the computer system that does certain kinds of form filling. But it was then pushed so hard in the business world as the next big thing. This was the looms that were going to replace all the people, that were making fabric in the textile mills, and anybody who didn't like it was a Luddite. And this was going to be the next big thing. Well, if you go back and you read about the Luddites, they were a lot more savvy than merely people saying, "Hey, I want to keep my job and I want you to keep doing this using an old-fashioned technology." They recognized that companies, the owners of the factories, were not going to use the savings to increase wages, to improve working conditions. They were merely going to fire a bunch of people and then devote themselves to these machines, which could produce an inferior product, and then tank their own businesses in the long run because they'd so committed to this idea of mechanization. There are still people who are making fabric by hand and making a living doing so, making high quality products. And the people who switched to the high-tech looms are gone, right? The handcrafted processes have outlasted them. The Luddites, it turns out, were right in a lot of ways because they recognized that there were still things the machines couldn't do, right? The same phenomena has happened where businesses were so pressured to say, we have AI. We have AI. AI in every facet of our business, regardless of whether or not it was actually an improvement. It just became a thing that you said, I can do this thing, I need to show my boss that I'm on the cutting edge, so I've got AI. And that has driven so much investment into AI that never should have been there, because the companies that are producing these LLMs can't simultaneously say to all these clients, hey, that's great that you're willing to give us money, but there's a limit to how smart this technology will get. They all have to lie and say, it's just going to get better, it's just going to get better, it's just going to get better. But it's not going to get better. It will get better to a point, and then it will peak. And then it can't get any smarter. And here's why. We've already seen this. If you are a company that is programming your large language model, you need this huge amount of input, right? And so you produce this robot that scours the internet and takes in all this information to say, what is probably the next thing that a human would write? Probably the next thing that a human would write. That predictive text that you use on your phone, that's literally training AI. What is the next word that a human would probably write? And you say this one, and you're saying, hey, AI program. That's probably the next word that a human would write. So you're training that AI. And then that AI says, what is the most average, normal thing for a person to write? Not a great writer, your average, normal person. Note that. Remember that. Average, right? So if more and more people start using ChatGPT, all these various other LLMs, information that they got from Grok and, Google's AI to be the output that they are putting into the internet, then you end up with a loop where the AI is saying, what is the next thing that a human would write? Only it can't distinguish between whether or not a human produced that or a different AI program produced that, or a human quoting AI produced that, right? Citing an AI, referencing an AI, pulling from an AI produced that. And you end up with this program that is feeding on itself. It's gotten to the point where it has maxed out on the amount of human intelligence that it can gather from, and the company doesn't know, is this coming from humans, or is because it has made a choice to say the only way that we're going to get enough input is to just steal it from everyone, right? Rather than paying humans where we know this is a human who is producing this. And so that large language model computer program is going to start to plateau in its ability to not sound like a large language model. And its ability to pass the Turing test will reach a peak and start to potentially even taper off as we get more savvy and say, I know the kind of average. I know how the average person, which is now LLMs, I know how ChatGPT sounds. And it can't get smarter than that because it is aiming for average, and we've learned to keep an eye out for average. Now, maybe I am overly optimistic. Maybe someone will figure out, hey, we need to be able to craft a distinct LLM that can merely be fed by good writing. I don't know how that individual or that computer would figure out what is good writing, and then train itself on what it considers to be better or worse writing rather than how do I sound average. But again, short of paying a bunch of humans in a room to train that AI, this is not a model that can continue to improve. And so when it fails to continue to improve, I think the bursting of that AI bubble is going to be quite dramatic. There has been so much invested, billions, perhaps trillions of dollars invested in the belief that this growth is going to be perpetual. And anytime you have people who are saying the growth will never end, so we can continue to invest in this and we will have a return, when the growth ceases, it's a shock to that system. We've seen this over and over. The tulips in Amsterdam, the housing market in the United States. When people believe it can never go down, they make very bad financial decisions because anything can go down, right? And when the AI bubble bursts, it is going to burst badly for a lot of companies. And my hope is that when it bursts and bursts badly, that will be really good for human writers. Not just because it will make our work more valuable monetarily, where people will say, ooh, we don't want to get into that situation again. Let's actually go out and hire some human writers. We'll pay them more. But also because as that peaking hits and that LLM can't get any better, that will not stop human beings from becoming more and more savvy to what that AI slop sounds like. And I say sounds like, I'm thinking the voice in your head as you're reading a book. We'll be able to read fakeness more easily because we will improve and it will stop improving. And so I do not believe that the robots are going to destroy, the ability to tell stories. Nor do I believe that they are going to be what ultimately, destroys us. I know people are very concerned about the economic impacts of these, bot farms. It's infinitesimal compared to cars. Like what's going to destroy us is airplanes and cars and our unwillingness to actually change our lives that dramatically. It's not going to be the new thing. It's going to be the thing we won't change. It's going to be the sacrifices that we won't make. But it is still the environmental impacts are still real. There are still real consequences. They are not the reason you should be opposed to AI. And I think you should be opposed to AI because of the ethics, but I also think that's unpersuasive. I think telling people this is a plagiarism machine and it just steals and the stealing is wrong isn't enough. I think the most persuasive argument that we can make to people is you should aim for better than being a C human being. We want you to work your way towards being an A writer, whether that is because you are someday going to be the person who, pens the next great novel or the next great film or whatever, or just so that you are improving as a thinker because we think on the page. So that's my riff on AI. Take that for what it's worth and employ that if you find yourself dealing with students, authors, peers who are saying, let's just turn to ChatGPT. Remind them, ChatGPT always aims for average. If you want something better than average, you need to start avoiding that. And people are going to start avoiding average, and the bubble's going to pop. I hope. We'll see if I'm wrong. That's my prediction. Take that hopefulness from somebody who is a confessed, overly naive optimist into your week, and we will all try and survive the rise of the robots just like we are surviving everything else. And I will see you next week because, we're surviving. We'll still be here. Have a good week, everybody.